We are in the middle of stage 2. We are applying a tilt shift blur effect. This is on page 229. We are working on the Boulevard file with the lights layer active, and we're going to go into filter and apply the blur gallery, selecting the tilt shift blur. Now this immediately puts a blur across this thing, and we want to change the blur from being up and down to being side to side. So you're going to grab one of these two circles, not the one in the middle, that's the pin, but grab one of these two circles, hold down your shift key as you click on that and drag to make a 90-degree shift. There we go. Then you're going to relocate the center of the blur. Right now it's right smack in the middle, and you can see how things are fuzzing out. So I'm going to relocate the center of this blur to the lights. Okay, so now I have a pretty decent area in here, and you can see this is pretty clear, and then we fuzz out as we're going. So I want to, now this line, for some reason my line, it did not stay white. It's actually a grayed out thing, but I'm going to grab that line, and I know I've got it because I've got my double-headed arrow, and I'm going to drag that closer. In fact, I'm going to put that right onto my tree trunk on that side, and then I'm going to grab the blur line and bring that closer in to the outside of that tree. I'm going to do the same thing on this one. I really would like, well, let me undo that. Make sure you're not picking up on the dot. Pick up on the line itself. And I'm going to pull mine in a little bit because I don't like the tree fuzzing out quite so much there. So I'm going to pull this over so I get a good clean shot and I don't have a fuzz too bad on those palm trees. I like that setup a little bit better. Next, I'm going to click on the blur ring, and this is going to control how much blur I'm getting. And I'm going to drag on that curve until I get a blur of about 20. And you can see how that changed the amount of blur. Then click OK in the options bar to accept the change. This is a destructive filter because the layer we're working on is a floating regular layer. This is not a smart layer. So you can see in the layers it's there's nothing extra on there. If we had done this as a smart layer, you'd be able to remove the filter, but we did this as a floating layer, and so the only way that we can undo this is to go back up in our history and undo it. So anything that we do afterwards, and once we save and close this file, we cannot go back and undo this. We would have to bring the layer in again. Now you're going to save this file, and we're going to go back to our festival file, deselect, and we have our bloom layer. We should be working on that because that's our only layer, and we're going to go in again to filter and blur gallery again, and this time pick up the iris blur. The iris blur comes up, and instead of having lines we have a circle. We want to move the center pin so that it's centered on that large flower, more or less. And then you're going to grab the right ellipse handle and bring this in and narrow it down. Then we want to grab the feather handle and drag down until it's placed at the top edge of the center flower. The feather handle is one of these dots that's between the circle and the flower. So we're going to bring that in and center that. Then we're going to hold down our Option key and click on the bottom feather handle and drag up to increase the blur distance on only the lower section. Then click on the blur ring and change the blur to approximately 20. Then click OK in the options bar or hit your enter key to apply the blur and save this file. There's more about the blur gallery on page 234, and it talks about different blurs, the field blur, the spin blur, path blur, and you might like to familiarize yourself with those. The path blur is really pretty fun. And then we'll be continuing on with stage 3, which is going to deal with placing the type in. Now, you should be familiar with the type. We've covered type in Illustrator. Type in Photoshop works similar, but not exactly the same. The terminology is given to you on page 236, and we're going to continue on page 37. You want to select the horizontal type tool. Click to set the default foreground and background colors, and in the option bar, change your font size to 28 points. Now we only have 24 in there. You're going to have to type in 28 points. Then you can click anywhere to create a type layer, which is going to be a point type layer. Again, we're already getting our lorem ipsum placeholder text in there, and there's formatting that's already being applied, just like in Illustrator. Change the text to Antelope Valley, and then commit that change. In your font menu, you're going to look for ATC, look for Garmin, and I'm going to move this because it's off to the side quite a bit of distance. Picking up my type tool again, I am again going to click and make my second layer and type in Poppy Festival. And just like in Illustrator, the font is carried over into the next selection. Select all and change your font style from medium to the ultra, and change the size to 72 points, which I know is in the drop down. Press your left arrow key. That is actually going to deselect your characters and move the insertion point to the beginning of the type, and then hold down your control key to give you the bounding box. Drag that type up until it's centered on the canvas. You should get your smart guides to help you with that, and you want to be about 1/4 of an inch below. Top of that should be about 1/4 of an inch below the guide, so that's pretty close. Then, still holding on to your control key, click the bottom right bounding box handle and drag down and resize the type so that it's about 1 1/4 inches tall. So we're going to take this down a little bit more. Now, if you have yours placed where Antelope Valley is behind your Poppy Festival, go ahead and just turn off the eyeball and hide that layer, and put an insertion point between the E and the F in Festival. In your options bar, toggle open the character paragraph panel, and you're going to adjust the kerning. Remember, kerning is the space between two letters. Tracking is for the whole thing. We're going to change the kerning in there to a -30. Then go through and continue adjusting the kerning between the letter pairs until you're satisfied with all of the results. The only one I see that I don't like is Poppy. And I may not have had quite the 1.5 inches that. So let me go to my move tool. I'm going to change there and look and see, and I think I can make my type, that's 1 inch, 1.25 inches. Oh yes, I needed to make my type a bit taller, so There, that's better. And then I can delete or drag off that extra line that I put in and reset my rulers. Then I'm going to make my Antelope Valley layer visible. And with the move tool and make sure auto select is deselected, I'm going to pull that right above the O in Poppy Festival. The text is too large to fit in the space between the P and the F. The first thing we want to do is change the color. So in our character panel, we're going to go into the colors, and as we go into the color picker, when we go off to the side, then the cursor is going to convert to the eyedropper. So let's pick up one of the oranges out of the poppy and change the color to that. I want a brighter orange. And then I'm going to change the font size down to 22 points from 28. I'm going to move that back over Poppy a little bit better, and then turning back on the auto selection, I'm going to pick up the Poppy Festival and change the color to white. Then I can save that file. Going back to the Boulevard file next, we're going to choose the vertical type tool, and in the options bar we want the ATC Garnet Ultra, 72 points, and we want to choose the top align text option. Click to create a new type layer and type in the all caps BLVD. When you use the vertical type tool, which we haven't used in Illustrator yet, each letter appears below the previous one. The left edges of the letters, particularly the B and the L, are not well aligned. Vertical doesn't recognize the edges, it just lines everything up in the center. So in the options bar, paragraph alignment options will change the position of type relative to the point where you click. So we can align the type below, centered on, or above the origin point, but we can't align left or right edges of the letters. Click in the new type layer in the layers panel to select the layer, but not the text, and then choose type, horizontal, orientation, horizontal. Now click to put an insertion point after the B, and we're going to just have to align our type this way. Put an insertion point right before the letter B, and then change the type size down to 12 points. Type in the word the, all caps, and hit enter. Selecting the B, L, V, and D, change the leading, and you're going to have to be in your character panel for this, to 55 points. Pick up your move tool, change the type so it begins in the top left corner about 1/4 of an inch away from the guidelines. Now you can go in and you can add different guides in there if you want to, or just kind of eyeball it. Then go to Edit, select Free Transform, and you're going to drag the bottom right handle down until the letters fill all the way down to within 1/4 of an inch of the guideline at the bottom. Do you want to hold your Shift key down? You might want to hold everything so that it keeps its proportions correct, and then hit enter to finalize the transformation. Double click on any of the letters, and that's going to select all of that. Now we want to put an insertion point in anywhere in the word the. In the paragraph panel, then change your indent left margin field to 4 points. And in the space before and after, make that a -3 points. Save your file.